So that takes care of all the housekeeping items. Let's go ahead and begin. So a little bit about us. My name is Sarah Cahill. I'm the Director of Volume Licensing Services here at CompuRx USA. My focus for the last 9 years has been helping organizations navigate the ever-changing world of Microsoft product licensing and licensing programs. And just to provide some background on our organization, for those who are not familiar, CompuRx is a global IT and license solutions provider specialized in sourcing, consulting, and cloud-based professional services. As the 6th largest Microsoft partner in the world, the CompuRx Group employs over 2,000 people in 80 sites in 31 countries across the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa. We assist our clients with software license management to help reduce the complexity of managing an organization's license procurement and renewal. Our work also focuses on the Microsoft Cloud Stack, largely around Office 365 and Microsoft Azure. We offer Exchange migrations for email, contacts, and calendars, as well as work with cloud collaboration solutions, including SharePoint, Skype for Business, and Yammer. Lastly, we work with clients to increase security and reliability with solutions such as Single Sign-On and Azure Rights Management. We have reoccurring webinars for each of these solutions, so look out for those on our website and in your email. And before we wrap up today, I'll give you an idea of what's on tap in the coming weeks. Additionally, if you'd like to hear more about what we do, let us know in that feedback form that'll pop up at the end of today's webinar. So a great precursor to our conversation today is the news that CompuRx has been awarded the 2015 Microsoft Partner of the Year Awards for volume licensing and software asset management. We're very proud of these awards as they're a reflection of the work we're doing on a daily basis with our customers, not just here in the US, but in all the countries where CompuRx is located. It's also important to note that we're working with organizations of all sizes, in all industries, in all corners of the globe. Here's a sampling of the customers we've worked with recently. Our wide range of customers allows us to learn from our work and apply best practices from not only a licensing perspective, but also software asset management and professional services. So let's get into it. The one common denominator with all three things Microsoft is licensing. While the technology improves, it seems that licensing remains the thorn in every IT manager's side. It's not as simple as knowing what product you need and buying the associated license. These days, you have different licensing models, licensing rights dependent on software assurance, and even different licensing rules depending on whether an application is for internal or external users. Not to mention the various programs under which you can buy that license. A seemingly simple request for the Windows Desktop Operating System license with and without software assurance led to all of the options you see here. There are so many things to consider that it's impossible to just quote the original request, which was 500 seats of Windows Pro and Enterprise. This is a real-life request for us that came in just recently, and it resulted in a 15-minute call to talk through the options and ask some additional questions to figure out what the customer actually needed. Without taking a step back and talking through the request, the organization could have been over-licensed, paid too much, or been out of compliance. You'll note that there's an $80,000 difference between the high and the low quotes. It's absolutely necessary to take the time to talk through any quote request, and your licensing partner should be an active participant in your Microsoft licensing, not just an order taker. A result of not taking the time could be an $80,000 mistake. And that's how we'd like to help you today. Let's take a look at some things to think about when analyzing your Microsoft licensing investment. So we've looked at how individual quote requests can be cumbersome. But what if you're in an existing licensing program? It's important to review your software licensing program at least once per year. In fact, it should be a quarterly conversation, and your partner should be providing you with major updates along the way. Even those in an enterprise agreement can fall victim to a licensing change or a price increase. A regular review of an organization's licensing helps to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Your licensing partner should take your agreed-upon roadmap and apply it to any quote requests or announced changes on the Microsoft side. What I want you to walk away with today are some ideas on how you can align your licensing strategy to your organization's priorities. I want you to find ways to reduce unused software and streamline so you can do more with less budget. I also want you to get out of the licensing game. That should not be your problem. Communicating your organization's strategy should allow your licensing partner to do the heavy lifting for you when it comes to licensing, and it should ensure that you're not putting yourself at risk for going over budget or being out of compliance. So let's just look at some stats here. 65% of enterprises are freezing or decreasing their software budgets over the next 2 years. And 96% of enterprises are wasting money on unused software. So budgets are not increasing. And with that in mind, how do you get what you need without requesting more budget? What should be taken into consideration when you're ready to upgrade your current Microsoft technology, or if it's time for a renewal of your existing agreement? Think about the licensing programs that give you more flexibility, or licensing models that allow you to spread your cost over time versus paying up front. You don't necessarily have to reduce your license counts or sacrifice technology in order to save money. You can often find ways to save just by leveraging the right licensing program and SKUs for your specific needs. So one of the first things you need to determine is, what is the right licensing model for my organization? And there are two options: perpetual licenses and subscription licenses. Perpetual licensing is what most of us have been used to when it comes to Microsoft. You buy a license with or without software assurance, and that is your organization's license forever. If you buy with software assurance, you get upgrade rights and some additional benefits. This is a capital expense, and should you decide not to renew your software assurance, you walk away with whatever the current version is at the time of expiration. There's little risk with this licensing model, but once you buy a license, you can't return it if you don't need it anymore. You can add licenses, but you can't reduce the number if you see fluctuation in your desktop count. So let's turn to subscriptions. You know, with the advent of Office 365 and Azure, subscription licensing is now a lot more common for Microsoft. It's a pay-as-you-go model, it's an operational expense, has a lower cost of entry. You don't own anything if you decide not to renew, which is a risk, but you do have the flexibility to only pay for what you need. It's much more accommodating, as an example, if you have a seasonal workforce. It's also important to note that the subscription model is largely licensed per user, so it becomes much easier to stay in compliance versus tracking what devices are running what applications. So once you determine the best licensing model for your organization, perpetual or subscription, it's next essential to choose the right program under which to purchase. Here's a very brief overview of a few of the notable options, but it definitely warrants diving in a little bit deeper to discuss each, which we'll do on subsequent slides. For each of these programs, it's important to consider your organization's size, Microsoft footprint, and preferred billing model. So let's start with the Open program. Open licensing is an entry-level program for most companies. It's transactional, and it offers a simple way to get the licensing you need, and it does offer a modest discount over what you pay in retail. It's only 5 licenses to enter the program, and once those 5 licenses are purchased, you're able to buy in any quantity over the next 2 years. However, if you buy with software assurance, that software assurance is not prorated to your agreement, so usually organizations end up with multiple open licensing agreements to manage. And if you've ever utilized what Microsoft calls the VLSC, your Volume Licensing Service Center, you can attest to how cumbersome it can be to manage, more than just a couple open licenses. There's also no additional discounting built into the program, so you don't benefit from your purchase volume above that initial 5 licenses. The one exception are those who qualify as academic, government, or nonprofit. There are deeper discounts if you meet the criteria to qualify under one of those categories. Next, I think it's important to touch on Select Plus. Select Plus is geared towards larger organizations, over 250 seats, but it's not cloud ready, meaning you can't purchase Office 365 or Azure under it. So Microsoft is actually retiring the program next year, and no customers are able to create a new Select Plus right now. So it truly is going away next year, and you won't be able to get into a Select Plus currently. Not going to go into detail about the program, but instead I really want to focus on what you should take into consideration if you have an existing Select Plus. If you currently purchase under Select Plus, you're going to need to transition your licensing to another program next year. Because this program is going end of life, now is a great time to take a closer look at your Microsoft investment so you're not scrambling as the deadline approaches. Depending on how you're currently licensed under the Select program, you could transition into an enterprise agreement, an SCE, or an MPSA, which is Microsoft's replacement for Select Plus. So, it makes sense to dive a little bit further into MPSA since it's what a lot of you will be dealing with in the near future. So MPSA, which is the Microsoft Product and Services Agreement, is Microsoft's replacement program for Select Plus. It's cloud ready, so you can buy Office 365, Azure, or any other cloud subscription under the agreement. MPSA, like Select Plus, allows organizations to attain better price points based on purchase volume. So the more you buy, the better price you get. It also allows for centralized or decentralized purchasing. A company can choose to manage all purchases through their headquarters, or they can allow each department, subsidiary, or country to manage their own purchasing under the same agreement. And the benefit of that decentralized model is that all of the purchases bubble up to the master agreement, so you benefit from combining your purchasing power. So to qualify for MPSA, you need to qualify in one or multiple product pools by accruing 500 points in that pool. The product pools are servers, applications, and systems. The server pool is generally the easiest one to qualify in, and systems is generally the most difficult. And to be perfectly honest, if you're qualifying for the systems pool, you should probably consider looking at an enterprise agreement because it might get you a better price point and a better agreement over MPSA or Select Plus. It's also important to note that the MPSA is evergreen, so you're not dealing with paperwork at every renewal. As long as you maintain the 500 points in a given pool, the agreement remains open to purchase under in that given pool. Should you not qualify after the first or subsequent years, the agreement can be reopened by a purchase of that 500 point minimum in a given pool. And of course, the more you buy, the better pricing levels you can reach. A lot of multinational organizations who don't require centralized purchasing prefer MPSA because they combine that purchasing power while still maintaining autonomy in each country. So it does benefit them greatly. So let's move into the enterprise agreement. The EA is something most of you are probably familiar with. You agree to license company-wide with one of Microsoft's enterprise products, and in return, you get a pretty aggressive price point. The enterprise products available in the EA are Office or Office 365, the CoreCal or eCal suite, and the desktop operating system. At least one of those must be purchased company-wide under the agreement to qualify. And by meeting that requirement, any other non-enterprise product can be licensed at the same discount. But please note that software assurance is required for non-subscription products. So it's important to analyze and figure out whether the software assurance investment makes the most sense for your organization. One trick that we like to suggest is adding an MPSA to your enterprise agreement. So for those products where you see the value of software assurance or you need it for product functionality and licensing rights, you can buy that under the EA and then buy everything else under the MPSA where you don't see the value of software assurance. Another very important benefit of the enterprise agreement is that you lock in the price and licensing model for the 3-year term of the agreement. And this only applies to licenses that you have purchased under your agreement. What it means is that you're immune to price increases or licensing changes for anything licensed under your agreement. It buys you some time to figure out how licensing changes will affect your organization before having to dive into that new model. The predictability in the pricing and licensing is a huge bonus if you have a complex Microsoft footprint. And then, another option under the enterprise agreement, you can always do an enterprise subscription. The enterprise subscription is an alternative to the traditional EA. It's 100% subscription, so it's a lower cost of entry than what you would see under the traditional enterprise agreement. It also allows you to true up or true down each year as long as you meet the minimum 250-seat requirement. Better yet, if you're using Office 365 as your enterprise product, there isn't a company-wide commitment. So if you have 250 Office 365 licenses within your organization, you could actually do an enterprise subscription even if it isn't company-wide, and that buys you into getting the discount for all of the other products. And you could do an MPSA under an enterprise subscription as well. So if you did want to buy perpetual licenses, you could do it in that MPSA while still using the enterprise subscription program. It's a great option for those organizations who want the flexibility to adjust their licensing counts on an annual basis, up or down. It's important to note that it is truly a subscription agreement, so you don't own anything if you walk away at renewal times. And that's an important piece. There is an option to buy out the perpetual licenses if you would like, but most organizations usually are in or they're out. They're either continuing to renew or they're going to walk away and move to a different program. And lastly, the server and cloud enrollment, which is generally called the SCE. It's actually a carve-out from the enterprise program. You don't have to have an enterprise agreement to start an SCE. It offers deeper discounts than what you get in EA if you're committing to certain purchase minimums within one of the workloads included in that program. Most organizations enter the program with their MSDN, Azure, System Center, or SharePoint footprint. But you can choose just one. You don't have to do all of them. And then you can choose whether you want a license on a perpetual or subscription basis, with the exception of Azure, which is always subscription. And one really great thing about the SCE is the flexibility it provides around Azure. So you can actually start an SCE for Azure for as little as a $1,200 initial commitment. It does provide a better price point than buying Azure through the Microsoft portal. So if you're consuming at least $100 per month in Azure, you should absolutely explore investing in that SCE. It is a 3-year program, and it does offer the price protection of the traditional EA. But it's important to note that for Azure, you do have the ability to true down in years 2 and 3, so your risk really is only that initial $1,200. So I definitely have to apologize for the deep licensing talk here, but it really is essential to have a baseline knowledge of the programs available to you. That's what you build off from before you start diving into specific software titles. In addition to the big decisions you have to make around the right licensing model and licensing program, there are some nuances that can help you reduce cost and complexity in little ways. For example, did you know that Team Foundation server licenses and CALs are included in most Visual Studio licenses? So if you're buying your TFS licenses separately, you're likely able to reduce that line item on your agreement. They're not expensive licenses, but if you're paying for them, you may not need to. If you're licensed for Visual Studio with MSDN and aren't using TFS, maybe there's a way you can explore deploying it, which might offset cost or heavy lifting someplace else. Also, did you know that there are certain licensing rights under your agreement? Are you leveraging the licensing right for training devices under your volume licensing agreement? In some programs, like the Enterprise Agreement, you can get complimentary licensing for up to 20 devices in a dedicated training facility. Make sure you're taking advantage of that because 20 licenses of Office is a hefty sum. When negotiating your agreement, it's a great way to reduce your license count. So make sure you're reading your agreements carefully, not just for the legalese, but the licensing rights included in the actual contracts for your agreement. And then did you know that software assurance is now a requirement for license mobility? So if you already buy with software assurance, you might be able to step up to higher editions to leverage the better software assurance rights, which means that at renewal time, you don't have to renew as many licenses. And it's also important to know that if you're not buying with software assurance on Windows Server, for example, you're not licensed for license mobility. So if you're doing load balancing and you don't have software assurance on your Windows Server standard, you're technically out of compliance when, according to Microsoft. And then finally, did you know that external users don't need to be licensed for some scenarios, notably SharePoint, Lync, or Skype for Business, and Exchange? You'll definitely want to make sure your specific scenario is covered, but for example, external users for SharePoint Online don't need any additional licensing. Those external non-employees are covered by the licensing that your end users have. And let's kind of dive into an example here and put it into practice. I've changed the names here to protect the innocent, but this is actually a real conversation that I've had recently. So Contoso Corporation has a SharePoint Online portal accessible by 1,000 employees and 500 non-employee external users. All employees are licensed with Office 365 Plan E3. They're also currently paying for SharePoint Online Plan 1 licensing for their 500 external users, which retails at about $5 per user per month. We went in and did a licensing assessment for this customer and kind of dove into why they were buying these SharePoint Online licenses in addition to their company-wide E3 Office 365 licenses, and we uncovered that it was actually for these external users. So because of that assessment and finding out how and why they're acquiring these licenses, we were able to get them to a point where they didn't have to renew that SharePoint subscription, which at $5 per user per month for 500 users equates to $30,000 a year. So this customer saved thousands of dollars per year just for looking into the situation a little further. And that's why it's so important that you have a partner that's going to ask all of the questions necessary to understand how you're using the licenses you're acquiring. If not, this could be you. It pays to spend 10 minutes talking through a quote request. Even better, have that quarterly conversation with your partner, which actually they should be driving, to make sure they understand what initiatives you have going on that could affect your licensing investment. With shrinking budgets, that $30,000 can go a long way to help with other IT initiatives. So there are a few questions that you should ask yourself to be able to take all of this info and apply it to your current and future licensing investments. I generally like to break it down into the following questions. First is, how am I licensed today, and when is my next planned upgrade? Do you prefer to be on the latest and greatest, or do you wait until a technology goes end of life before upgrading? Second, how does my organization prefer to procure their software? Does my company prefer CapEx over OpEx, centralized versus decentralized, upfront or annual payments, etc.? Next, what are my growth expectations, if any? Or is there any seasonality built into my seat count? And finally, how equipped is my IT staff to manage the technology I'm invested in? Do you spend most of your time tackling reactive problems? Could your IT staff accomplish more if the reactive tasks were taken off their plate? By taking these questions into consideration, your licensing partner should be able to help put together a strategy to meet your needs while maintaining your budget requirements at the same time. The result is what we call a licensing assessment. It takes all of the data associated with your current licensing footprint, where you want to go, what resources you have to get there, and then it maps out all of the different options that you have. As with all things Microsoft, it's not always an easy answer, but a good partner will help walk you through the options and help you determine the best fit. So, I'm sure your big questions for me are, what is this assessment? How much work does it require me to do? And how much is this thing going to cost me? So the assessment looks a lot like what you see here. This is just one slide of a bigger example. So one scenario that's built out based on a conversation about a current license state and where an organization is going from a technology and budget and procurement perspective. Generally, it takes an hour-long conversation to get all the basic information needed. We take that data, we pull price lists, we look at upgrade cycles both at your organization and Microsoft's release cycles, how you use a particular title, and then we map it all out over 3 to 9 years to show you all the different ways that you can acquire that licensing. The pros and cons with each option are outlined for you, along with any risks associated with each option. For example, rapid growth in an EA means that you're going to be required to true up a large amount based on that growth. Whereas an EAS, or a subscription license, gives you a lower cost of entry and a more predictable cost, less of an impact up front. Essentially, you walk away with all the important information you need to make a determination as to what licensing structure makes the most sense for your organization. So we obviously asked you here for a reason, right? As I mentioned earlier, we were named Microsoft's Volume Licensing Partner of the Year on a global level. I like to think we know our stuff, and even better, we understand not only US-based organizations, but also multinational organizations. So you got it, we've done it. I would like to offer you today a free licensing assessment for your Microsoft licensing and agreements. Essentially, let our experts take a look at ways to apply the tips we've talked about today to your organization. If you're in a great place, licensing and agreement-wise, that's great. We'll let you know. We'll confirm that you're on the right path. If not, we'll offer some ways to streamline and some things to talk about. The only requirements are permission to see what licensing you currently own, an hour of your time for Q&A, and then a follow-up of probably 30 minutes to go through the results. So, it's beneficial to either cement that you're on the right path or to give you some options. And you can identify if you are interested in that license assessment in the feedback form that pops up when you log out of this webinar today. You can indicate whether or not you're interested. And with that, I definitely want to answer any questions that you might have. I know that licensing could fill a week's worth of sessions, and I know that it often makes people's eyes glaze over. So I really tried to focus on the basics here and give you some important points, but I am happy to answer any specific questions. And Jean has a few of them in the queue for me, so let me tackle those. Let's see, are you able to utilize MPSA if you don't purchase 250 licenses at one time, but will eventually get to that number? The example here is a company wants to test SharePoint with 50 users before purchasing the entire 250. Absolutely. So in year one of that MPSA, you just have to reach the 250 points that are required. It does not have to be an upfront purchase. You could buy all 500 points on the last day of that first year of your agreement. So absolutely, you could buy 50 at the outset and then the rest to get you to the purchase minimum whenever you need to during that first year. It's also important to note that you can mix and match licenses, so you don't have to buy 250 of a given product. you could buy a combination of server titles, of cloud and on-prem. So there is some flexibility within the program there. Another question is, are there calculators for the different on-prem, physical, virtual, and cloud software licenses? So there are a few calculators that are out there. I know that on our website we have a calculator that takes a look at, what's my ROI in Office 365 if I was to move from on-prem to Office 365. So that calculator is definitely out there and readily available. There is a Microsoft calculator for Azure where you can actually go in and say, what are the VMs and servers I'm going to spin up under Azure, and it gives you an idea of what your consumption would be. What we generally do is take that. You can go in and say, here's what I'm looking to consume in Azure, and then we map it out to the SCE price list to give you an idea of what are the costs, what cost savings could you recognize in SCE over the portal. So there is a calculator there for Azure, but it does require a little bit of additional work to figure out what it would be in SCE. And then to compare to something like AWS, it is a bit more manual. We would take a look at a similar AWS calculator and compare to Azure. So a bit of a manual process, but we can absolutely help you with that. And then part 2 of that question is, as in you input the VM server type, number of cores. Absolutely. So that is that calculator I was talking about for Azure. You really dive deep, and you can get very granular in what you're going to be consuming in Azure to help you determine what the cost is. I do see another question here. So can a group of companies, all wholly owned subsidiaries, combine purchase discounts but keep the costs and renewals separate? Absolutely. So Microsoft requires that to be able to combine your purchasing power, you have to be at least 50% owned or share 50% ownership amongst those subsidiaries. They can create a single MPSA, and under that MPSA you can create different purchase accounts for each of those different subsidiaries under their given names. And they each manage their own licensing. They're billed directly, but because they're all individual purchase accounts under the same MPSA, they're combining their purchasing power to determine what the shared level is, and by level I mean price level, across all of those organizations. So yes, absolutely, you can combine the purchase power of any subsidiaries under that MPSA agreement while maintaining individual control of licensing and billing. Any other questions? I'll give it a moment to see if anything else comes through. Okay, not seeing anything else right now, but I did want to at least give you an idea of the upcoming webinars that we have going on. I do think that a great follow-up to this would be our webinar on the 16th, the Roadmap for Future Savings, Optimizing Your Software Investment. It's looking a lot at software asset management and making sure that, across the board, not just Microsoft, that you're taking into consideration everything that you might need from a software perspective. But we also have some great sessions on, cloud messaging, cloud security and DR, and Microsoft Azure. And I will leave you today with just a reminder of the feedback form that will pop up when you log out today. Make sure you give us some feedback and make sure you're entered into that raffle that we're going to be having as a benefit of attending today. And if you want a Microsoft license assessment, it's absolutely something we can take care of for you. And we will reach out. And finally, we really want to thank you, and I personally want to thank you for attending today. I hope you were able to get some new knowledge when it comes to Microsoft licensing, or maybe pick up a tip or two of how to streamline your licensing investment internally. And I really hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.